You're listening to the Monday Night Community Show with Daniel on BRFM.
We are talking to Dave Hale from the Sheppey Horticultural Society this evening right here at BRFM. Dave, are there any plants you can be planting at this time of year?
I'm glad this isn't a TV programme, actually, because they'd see huge grins across both our faces, I think, Daniel, wouldn't they? It's something of an understatement, I think, but you would agree with me that this year so far has been a very difficult one to get on in the garden or on the allotment. There's just been so much bad weather for so long, and it seems there won't be enough time to get it all in. I won't say that it's going to become desperate measures, because there's still quite a lot of time. We are, after all, still in March. A lot of plants and seeds go in April, May, sometimes in June, so directly. But hopefully we'll be hurrying to catch up when the weather finally does break for the better. I think patience is what's needed, actually. It's very easy to say, I've got to get it in, I've got to get it in. But if it's in a pot, if it's heeled in somewhere safely, away from the wind, away from the weather, then fine, there shouldn't be too much problem with any plants that may have been bought over the last couple of weeks, or those which you want to protect. But having said that, there are plenty of colourful plants that can be bought from garden centres and nurseries. I was in the garden centre nursery last week, and it was a riot of colour. The kind of colour that you would expect. Obviously narcissus, tulips coming up, anemones, wood anemones, hyacinths, leucojum, all of these kinds of early spring plants which are now finally starting to come through. So yes, the stuff is out there, ready to be planted up. But even though the ground could still be very wet, don't forget that the new plantings will still need to be watered for a period. I know we've got a lot of water around at the moment, until roots are firmly established and the plant is showing signs of growth. As I've said, there are many varieties of spring bulbs, and I've been through a list of some of them that you're likely to see on the shelves now. If you're buying of, say, potted spring bulbs from last year, for instance, and I think we mentioned this on a seasonal basis, I think we mentioned it last year, it might be useful just to dig the pot again into the ground with the plant still in it. For instance, I've just planted some narcissus, which I've grown over the years, leave them in the pot, put them into the pot. It looks a heck of a sight more natural rather than planting pots around all over the place.
Yeah.
So that when that particular flower or that bulb actually dies back, just whip the pot out and you can replace it with something else. And it's an ever-changing scenario in the garden, so it's a very useful thing. Just a tip to actually say, don't bother about taking the bulbs out or replanting wood. If you're buying them in pots, put the pot straight into the ground. It's a clump. When it's finished, take it out, put something else in its place. So you have a garden or a plot that changes with the seasons. On the vegetable side, there are seeds that should be going in now or over the next week or so, and I say that with a big grin or something of a smirk on my face. Early season potatoes, or the first earlies, are traditionally planted around the Easter time, but whether anybody will be planting them next weekend remains to be seen. But there are things which you can actually buy. There are lots of things which are coming through on the shelves which will give us colour and which will relieve some of the drabness that we've been seeing over these last couple of months, in fact. Most seedlings, for instance, if you are planting seedlings, I would consider that you must keep them protected for a while longer. They'll benefit from being protected for a little while longer, or plant in April, plant in May.
And I was talking about how the weather's staying cold. I was just wondering, is it affecting any of the plants? We're getting some lovely crocuses and daffodils coming up, and then suddenly we're getting this cold and snow, and then I've got fleece over some plants. You can see the plants are starting to grow underneath and wanting to grow, but you can't take the fleece off because of the cold. And how is that all working, I suppose?
It's a real dilemma, this action, isn't it? One day it's, they promise us. Well, last week it was 17 degrees in the shade somewhere, so you're thinking, hey, I'm basking in summer.
Yeah.
2-3 days later, it's back down -0 degrees centigrade plus. You're still going to need winter protection. Not necessarily for those plants like narcissus and those early spring flowering plants which are coming through. They're hardy enough, or should be hardy enough. What might damage them, of course, is the wind. It might knock them over, so you might want to put a small protection around them to stop them from being blown over. There's nothing worse than having grown narcissus, watch them come up, and daffodils and what have you. Watch them come up, reach their full height, just about to open their buds. The wind comes along. What do you have to do? You have to use them as cut flowers, and they pretty much die after 3 or 4 days, in effect. Much better to have left them in the ground, so give them some kind of protection. But those plants which are less hardy, for instance, my wife has a lemon tree, which is now too big to put back into the greenhouse. So yes, like we were saying when you were playing a record there, covering it with fleece. By all means, just cover it with fleece to give it some protection. Blanket, straw, even carpets, things like that. Anything to help protect these particular plants, certainly in this kind of weather that we're actually having. Bubble wrap is another good one as well. Quite cheap, bubble wrap. A lot of people, when they buy stuff, it comes out with some polyurethane kind of material, or bubble wrap is usually part of the packaging. Keep it, save it. It's come as part of your the thing that you actually bought. But I would suggest that you keep a watching eye on it, because under bubble wrap or plastic, that kind of thing, it can actually sweat, and it could be deleterious to the plant, in effect. The problem with that, and it's something we were talking about while the record was actually playing, you need to be aware of the temperature all the time. It's one thing to put the fleece on when it's below 0, but once it goes back up above 0, you need to be aware that, of course, there is a certain amount of heat. Don't allow the plant to sweat, in effect, or there'll be a lot of moisture within that capsule that you're actually putting. So it's a case of being very watchful. You've got to take it off, you've got to keep it on, keep it off, take it off, put it on again. It's a problem, and I'm not suggesting everybody looks out the window every 5 minutes, but you need to be aware of what the weather forecast is likely to be. As a gardener, you would be anyway.
And one of the things I always like to ask you, Dave, is if you're planning to go out over the weekend or the next couple of weeks to come, what sort of things can you be getting on with?
We go back to the weather again, don't we? As long as it's not raining, yeah. Because of the weather, there is now so much to do, and a lot of people might think, and I just mentioned this actually, that everything is stacking up. But the first piece of advice I would give to everybody is actually wrap up warm, because this weather seems to want to stick around for a while yet. We were discussing, I was out about a week or so ago when it was something like 17 degrees. Fine, just dressed in a jumper. And what people tend to forget that it was then the middle of March. And of course the sun goes down, or dips down behind the horizon very much more quickly than it would do in May and June. And inevitably you get colder a lot quicker. So first piece of advice is wrap up warm. There's everything to be said for keeping yourself warm. Second piece, I think it would say, don't overdo it. Remember, many people haven't been doing the heavy stuff for quite a little while, i.e. because we're just coming out of winter. So work up to the main jobs. Preparation for the next year, or for the coming year, I think that comes next, and cleaning up much of the mess that winter's left behind. Inevitably, during the winter, and I'm as big or as guilty as anybody when saying this, I'll do that next week, and of course next week doesn't come around until such time as you start to think, hold on, I've got to do it because I've got stuff coming up through the ground. Take stock of what survived over the winter and might need replacing. If the ground's still boggy or sticky, keep off it for a while so as not to compact it. I think that's good advice, actually, because it'd be a heck of a sight harder to dig once actually the weather does finally break. Another thing, actually, is people tend to forget this. Check if you're putting seeds into seed trays or pots. Check that your seed trays and pots are clean and disinfected, and that they're actually ready to take seeds. A number of times I've been caught thinking, oh, crikey, I've got the seedlings coming up. I want to put them in. I haven't got the pots ready yet. So do it the right way around. Make sure that your pots are ready before the seedlings go into them. Check your tools and machinery, that they're both sharp and fit for purpose as well. I've noticed that plastic has been cracking over the winter because it's been so cold. I had a washing line. I know this isn't gardening. I had a washing line which I had to completely replace because it cracked in so many places for being left in the garden. So make sure that the machinery is fit for purpose. Start mulching around established plants. Because there's been so much wet weather, this is something else that people tend to forget, and it's something that we often talk about on the allotments. fertiliser, because it has been so wet, fertiliser may very well have leached out of the soil. So if you're putting new plants in which are really thirsting and really ready to go, they want something to grab onto and something which will feed them. So put some fertiliser back into the ground before you actually start putting your plants back in, or before you start sowing. Put a layer of compost and mulch well, but don't try to do it all at once. In effect, because you're gearing yourself up to coming up to summer or late spring, make a task a day, in effect, and stick to it and say, that's enough for the day, because there's still time. Weeding. There's a smile on your face when I say weeding. I'm sure you've got lots and lots of weeds.
Yeah.
That was a single yup. They love a bit of moisture, don't they, Justin? But if you try to get them up now, it'll be easier to get them out because of the wet soil that's around them. As you know, if Sheppey soil goes like concrete, you have no chance of actually getting out, tap roots of weeds, put it that way. Another good thing, actually, is to start up your hanging baskets now. Start thinking about your hanging baskets, because we were saying there's so much available in the garden centres and the nurseries. Start thinking about your hanging baskets if you're putting them up.
Yeah, because that's something I wouldn't have thought about necessarily, but I suppose it is time to think about that.
Absolutely, because the plants are available.
Yeah.
And they're very well priced this year, obviously. But keep them protected, and keep them protected. It isn't yet time for them to go out. And the other thing, it's something I thought about because I've got cyclamen along a back shelf, is feed your indoor pot plants. They've been doing wonderful things for you in the nice heat of conservatories and windowsills all throughout the winter, and I've managed to keep quite a few of them alive over the winter. We've had cyclamen now for about 3 or 4 months, which is for me is quite a record. But start to feed your indoor pot plants as well. They're going to need it just as much as the plants outside. So that's something that always tends to get forgotten, actually. Pot plants this side of the glass, you walk past them because you're going to do some gardening. So you fertilise, you compost, you mulch, you do everything in preparation, and what do you do when you come back in and take your boots off? You walk straight past them again. So they say, hey boss, over here, what about some feed?
What can people be getting on with in the garden and the allotment over the next couple of months to come?
Oh, I think, in fact, it's something to keep a watching eye on weather. I know the whole theme of this evening has been very much the weather, but it is so important. So perhaps wait until April or even early May to plant your seeds. There's still time. If you look on the back of a lot of the packets, seed packets for instance, it's planting or sowing April, May, June sometimes. Things like tomatoes, runner beans, French beans are much more tender than you would give them credit for. But so beans could perhaps be sown directly into the warmer soil in June. I say that advisedly. But if in doubt, wait till the weather and the soil warms up. I think you need to continue weeding, because as the weather does warm up, weeds will grow that much faster. And they always seem to grow very fast, actually. Keep a careful watch on what's growing well. Those plants that might need a bit of help as the weather warms up, to plant out those tender plants, as I've said, that have been growing in the cold frame or the greenhouse, but leave it until the weather really is much more sure. Protect any fruit bushes from the marauding birds, because if you think about it, that some birds, like blue tits for instance and great tits, they will start pecking the buds if you have any fruit bushes.
Right.
They don't just go for the fruit. That usually is the premise of robins and blackbirds, and thrushes, for instance. But the great tits or the tit family will perhaps start, as well as looking for the first onset of aphids, perhaps, or little pests and what have you. But they will actually take the buds off as well. So certainly protect any fruit bushes from the marauding birds. Start to keep a careful lookout or watch for the other perennial pests and deal with those accordingly as well. You'd be surprised how quickly you can get an infestation of aphid without you knowing that it's actually arrived. So keep a lookout for that as well. So inspect. You could also start encouraging the pollinating insects in and around the vegetable garden. That I've seen bumblebees flying already. Actually, not so much honeybee, but certainly bumblebees are already in flight. Then they're looking for food, nectar, pollen, whatever. So make sure that the bumblebees, in effect, are well fed. Keep feeding the birds. I've just said that be careful and protect your bushes, those bushes that you want to keep the fruit on.
Yeah.
But if you are feeding the birds, I think you must keep feeding the birds themselves, because they'll have young coming on, and those young will obviously want to be fed as well. They'll also do a useful job for you by eliminating some of the pests, admittedly along with some of the buds as well, which are on your fruit bushes. And then perhaps it's time for relaxation and to look at the fruits of your labours.
Actually, saying that, you're talking about green fly and things. Actually, on one of the roses, just before this cold, I actually see someone. I don't know if this cold's got rid of them now, but they're actually there this early on, which surprised me.
You'd be surprised at the number of insects that do actually manage to overwinter. I'm still growing cabbages or brassicas on the plot, and I shake them, and there are trillions of whitefly coming off it. Not that I mind that, my wife steeps them in salt water, so that, they die once we get them home to cook the brassica itself. But there are any number of insects that can actually overwinter. Don't forget, of course, that if they're hunkered down in that fruit or in that vegetable or whatever, they're protected from the inclement weather. So it's as well to keep a weather eye out for them. No puns intended where that's concerned. But certainly whitefly, they will fly, and I can say the only way of eradicating them is either spraying, and you'd be surprised the number of times you actually do have to spray. At what time of the year you're tending to spray, certainly for whitefly.
And I was wondering, Dave, do you have any useful tips for the time of year?
Stay in the warm? No,
yeah.
I jest. I really do jest, honestly. I think number one on that, in my own garden, excuse me, in my own garden I have some ornamental grasses. I tend to leave them alone, as they'll still give your garden shape over the winter months when there's not much else actually growing. They'll give height, they'll give a pleasant outlook. They'll also feed small birds with the seed heads, and you can cut them back later in the spring when the new growth starts appearing. But not only are they providing seed heads for the birds, but they're also providing useful nesting material as well. You'll often see the smaller birds trying to take away the fronds, for instance, from... Obviously, you will see it with pampas because it's a very showy plant, but a lot of the other ornamental grasses will have, how can we say, feathery seed heads to them, so it will feed the birds as well as provide nesting material. From pillar to post, mostly, I suppose, use a circuit breaker if you're using electrical machinery. I say this very often, but it is so easily done to have an accident, and certainly where it's still very damp out there. So be careful when you're actually using electrical machinery. A lot of people are now starting to prune hedges and cut hedges back and what have you. So use a circuit breaker. Here's a nice one, actually. I was in a garden centre. I see a lot of garden centres, travel to them quite often. Water butts, apparently, have all come down in price. You're smiling, Daniel.
Yeah.
And now's the time to gather lots of free rainwater from discounted water butts. Don't wait till there's yet another hosepipe ban, which everybody tells me is bound to happen in a couple of months' time. But... butts or barrels seem to be half price at the moment, so if you see something which is of good, you think is good value, then go out and get it. I've got about 5 or 6 in the garden, in my own particular garden, and I find them extremely useful. Now that the island, of course, is largely metered with water, and water is expensive, I've just had a meter put in, so I'm going to be using my butts a heck of a sight more extensively than perhaps getting the hose out and running it off the mains. Insulating the ground, we've talked about this actually. Insulating the ground and flower beds is one way of protecting valuable plants during the winter months. Cover the beds with straw, leaf mulch, keep them warm. Particularly if people are obviously growing dahlias or have tried to keep them overwintered in the ground rather than dig them up. Make sure that there's a hefty amount of straw or mulch over the top of them to protect them from the frost. Moving plants in pots into a conservatory or a greenhouse is another one. While this weather continues, it's as well to keep them in there. Citrus plants, for instance, will continue to flower and give you enjoyment. In if you're leaving them out, and it's something we've just been talking about, if you're leaving that kind of thing out, a citrus plant out, then obviously it's essential that you cover it with some kind of a fleece and keep an eye on it to make sure that it doesn't sweat. Those plants which are both vulnerable to low temperatures, I suppose, and which can't be moved because they're too heavy, they could be wrapped up in that kind of insulating material. And as we've already said, it doesn't have to be expensive stuff. It could be bits of carpet, bits of blanket, toweling, all kinds of stuff can actually be used just to cut down the wind and to make a wind barrier around these very expensive plants that people are, tend to buy. If you can't move the plant, and if it's too heavy, lift it off the ground a little, actually, to make sure that there's air coming underneath. So there's an awful lot of tips which are actually out there, and I've gone, through some of them here, actually. You could go on, and lots of people will think, maybe that's a good idea. I've discovered something else that I can actually do. Gardening is like that. It doesn't have to be a bought item. You can find an item, you can use something else. Allotmenteers are very good at using stuff which somebody else has actually thrown away. So, there are some tips which I hope are of use to people.
And Dave, how much will an allotment plot cost for the year?
We feel that the level of fees that we actually charge for the year reflect very good value for all allotment holders. For instance, they cost, would you believe it, less than 80p a week. So it's less than £1 a week, actually. It's about it's 79.8p per week. So if you added that up, actually, a 10-rod allotment, which is the maximum size that we do actually offer for 2013, 10 rods, the ground rent's 25 quid. Water rate is £15. As we've mentioned already this evening, and we've mentioned previous occasions, water is expensive. The society subscription is £1.50, and that adds to the grand total of £41.50 for the year. That's a 10-rod allotment. 5-rod, ground rent is £12.50. Water rate, £7.50, obviously because it's halved in size. Again, the society subscription is £1.50. So that will cost you a grand total of £21.50 per year. What we've been doing when people have been moving off 10-rod plots, we've been splitting them up into 2 5-rods. So that if newcomers are coming on, we actually offer them a 5-rod to say, see how you get on with that. If another 10-rod becomes available, and you're in line for it, then fine, we will up you to that fuller size if you feel that you can actually manage it. But 5-rod is very manageable. You'd be surprised just how much you can actually get off 5 rods. If you think of a 10-rod, as I was saying earlier, was about 75 feet by 30 feet. So half of that, 35 by 35 roughly, that's a lot of space actually to grow vegetables in. You don't have to be an allotment holder to be a member of the society. That membership fee of £1.50 entitles you to use our shops and also to enter our annual summer show. I did say I was going to mention this, didn't I? But it's our Golden Jubilee annual show this year on the 31st of August and the 1st of September. I hope I've got that right. I'm just checking to make absolutely sure. Saturday the 31st of August and Sunday the 1st of September. Saturday 3 p.m. till 6. And then Sunday 11 a.m. till 4 p.m. and we'll be holding the same, the auction. What was nice actually, we've made a profit last couple of years. You've been down to our shows, so you know what they look like. But we've made a profit, and it was absolutely delightful for the society to actually hand over £200 of the profit to MenCap, and we were delighted to be able to do it because we used their hall. So I think it goes hand in hand that we should, offer to help the MenCap Society. So, as I say, 10-rod, £41.50, that's total, and 5-rod, £21.50. Just one other thing to add to that, we had our annual general meeting about a week or so ago, and we decided to hold those fees and rents for 2014 as well. So there will be no price rises from this year onwards. We've held the price for a couple of years now. We think it's very, very good value for money. 79.8 pence per week, not bad.
No, not bad at all. So if somebody is interested in renting an allotment plot, what should they do?
I think, first of all, it's most important that you can't do it in isolation, unless, of course, you're a single person or it's just a couple of you. But discuss your plans with your family. Involve the family from the start. We like people to do that because we like to see younger people on the plot. It's not just that I'm growing older, it's just and that people are growing younger, but it's very nice to see that there is another generation coming on. Read up on the subject. There's any number of books out there now, magazine articles. I defy you to open up a weekend magazine or a weekend newspaper and not see an article on growing your own food or growing your own. The Consumer Society, the Consumers Association, that they're actually advertising, grow your own veg. So yes, it is a big thing now. Be committed, but work at your own pace. It's not a race. There is no race involved here. You don't have to be first across the winning line or the finishing post. Decide on your targets, such as what you really want to grow, how much time you can devote to it. I probably, when I first started, asked the silliest question I've ever asked, which was, how much time do I have to devote to this? And somebody actually quite wisely turned around and said, as much as you want to, quite frankly. It's not all hard graft, but there is obviously some work to do, and you've seen that when you come down, that people are digging away, and they're sometimes on hands and knees, especially when they're trying to pull those weeds out.
Yeah.
Above all, though, I think you need to enjoy the experience, and enjoy the experience of eating the fruits and veg of your own labours, and take pride in what you've actually grown. There's no other kudos than sitting around your lunch table or your weekend dinner table saying, I grew that, and people are actually eating it and enjoying it as well. Gardening, allotmenteering is its own free fitness programme. Again, as you've seen, people digging away, merrily away. And there's always time to switch off. Again, you've seen that, I think, actually, when you've come down to see us. It's sheerness, but the birds are singing, and there's a quietness about the place, isn't there?
Yeah, there is.
You have noticed that, and you can just be in your own world for a little while, even in sheerness. And can I mention the contacts, if I may?
Yeah, sure, definitely.
I know we'd leave this usually until the end. But you can contact us, or the Society, by getting in touch and telephoning the Secretary. That's Mrs. Sue Underhill, on 01795, of course, 661547. Or, better still, when the weather gets better, come and see us on a Sunday and walk around, because we're always pleased to show people around, to show them what we do, how we do it, and if there's anything available, or if they want really to take up an allotment or a plot, put your name down at Richmond Street, or decide to take a plot at Medway Road. Both the plots are available, or both sites are actually available. We've also started up a new website, which might come as slight news to you, obviously. It's a new site, so there's not a great deal on it yet. We still have to decide what we actually want to put on it. But there are any number of websites out there. But Sheppey Horticultural Society has joined the great website in the sky, actually. And as it's our Golden Jubilee, but this is why we decided to do it, because it's our Golden Jubilee year. We can actually put all kinds of things on. The Silver Spade competition, the annual show, of course. So, yes, we've started up a new website, which is Sheppey Horticultural Society. In fact, you can Google it, and it's the second item down. There's not a great deal on there at the particular moment, but because we're still writing to it, in effect. So, yeah. We've joined the 21st century, Daniel. So it's out there, and hopefully we'll be putting some useful stuff on there. But as I say, Sue Underhill's the first person, the first port of call, and she's on 01795 661 547.
Dave, as always, it's great to have you here at the Monday Night Community Show. Thank you very much for coming along.
First of all, I want to make an apology to you and your listeners. I'm sorry I kept going on about the weather, but gardeners tend to notice it more than anybody else. But it is a real factor this year, actually. But I think people have to be patient. There is still, I won't say a great deal of time, but there is still time to be actually putting things in. And I think your plants will be all the better for it, rather than trying to push them forward or rush them or put them in the ground now, with the chance that they might rot off and you've got to do it all over again. There's nothing worse than doing twice. when you could do it once at a safety reason.
Dave, as always, thank you very much, and we'll see you in a couple of months' time.
Hopefully so, and thank you again for inviting us. It's very kind.
That's Dave Hale from the Sheppey Horticultural Society right here at BRFM on the Monday Night Community Show.